We just got the news that player health and monster damage are being increased by 25% in patch 10.1, which essentially equates to healing effectiveness being nerfed by 25%. Blizzard's justification is as follows. We've decided to increase both player stamina and enemy damage by 25% in Embers of Neltharion. This is very much like an adjustment that was made just before the launch of Dragonflight, and it's for the same reasons. When damage mitigation abilities and healing are too strong relative to player health, the only way to threaten players is to make enemy damage very high and spiky. If healers can very quickly top off their teammates and mana isn't a limiting factor, enemies have to be tuned to have the capacity to do burst damage that kills players before healers can react. That isn't very satisfying gameplay. Increasing player health gives players more time to react to incoming damage, and it makes players' choices about cooldowns and mana management more meaningful. So I wanted to give you guys my thoughts on these changes. I also want to preface it all by saying that I am a healer main who focuses on Mythic Plus and pushes pretty high keys, mostly with pugs or at best partial pre-mades, and I wanted to share my perspective because I think it will be relatable for a lot of people. So I'm going to be focusing on the Mythic Plus repercussions of this nerf as someone who, well, doesn't really care about raiding all that much. I want to start with something stated in the blue post, and that's the fact that a similar change was made toward the end of Dragonflight beta, although that change was to the tune of 40% rather than 25%. Looking back on that change months later, I have mixed feelings. On the one hand, going from Shadowlands to Dragonflight, I would agree that there wasn't enough healing throughput happening in dungeons, and the additional healing needed to be successful in Dragonflight dungeons made the game more enjoyable from a healer perspective and made me feel like a more crucial part of the group. I do think there was a number of problems about the way it was implemented, however. Much like this new 25% change, I am not a fan of the lateness of this nerf, meaning that when they did it back in the beta, it was really close to release, and I didn't feel that its consequences were carefully looked at, and I fear that is what will happen again. What I felt happened with the original 40% change was that it really hurt healer balance. At the beginning of Dragonflight, if you weren't a Preservation Evoker or Resto Druid, you were going to have a really hard time meeting the healing checks necessary to time keys because healer balance was honestly really poor. It took months of spec buffs and dungeon nerfs to get to the point we're at now in 10.0.7, where I would argue healer balance is in a really good spot. If we're going to need to go through cycle after cycle of hotfixes to make the Season 2 dungeons actually healable again by all the healing specs, then I feel like we might as well just not even do the 25% nerf and have timeable keys from day one. And that brings me to the current 25% nerf. Again, I'm not a fan of how late in the game this is coming to us because I feel like at this point it will go live pretty much no matter what, like the previous nerf did. I'm hoping that since healer balance is in an undeniably better spot than it was at the beginning for 10.0, that this nerf will not devastate some of the healing specs the way the previous one did. My other concern is where Blizzard is actually getting the idea that healers are too powerful from. I haven't really gotten to test 10.1 much on the PTR, so I can't speak to healing in the new content, and it could very well be that healers are just scaling too hard and content is becoming too easy. But speaking from my own experiences in Dragonflight 10.0, pushing keys all through the patch, I can't say that the sentiment of healing being too easy really matches my experiences much at all. This kind of asks the bigger question of who Blizzard is balancing the game for. Let me give you an example. On the stream the other night, we did a 23 Shadow Moon with a group of 3.2k-ish players. As the healer, with nearly every dangerous cast getting kicked or stopped, essentially every boss and trash mechanic being done correctly, and defensive being used at the appropriate times, I was pretty much free to sit back, relax, and DPS. One of the easiest keys I've done in a while. And for the rest of the night, our group struggled over and over. Healing was anything but easy, and even in groups with players in the 3k range, which represents less than 1% of the WoW community, there was plenty of healing to be done. So while it's true that if all 5 players are playing 100% optimally, they are often in very little danger, I would say that for the overwhelming majority of the player base, that rarely, if ever, actually happens. So, should the game be balanced around perfect play, focused on the highest echelon of players, or more of what's typical of the majority of the player base? I don't actually know, and I could see a case being made for each one. On one hand, it looks pretty bad if you go watch an event featuring the best players in the world, such as Race to World First or the MDI, and one of the 3 roles is barely doing anything or straight up being replaced because it's not important because damage going out is so minimal. However, on the other hand, I think that a lot of healers are actually really struggling with the amount of damage going out, and they might be reluctant to continue healing if they see another nerf coming in the name of healing being too easy. I see this sentiment echoed in the comments of my videos and on my stream every day. I'm also really curious to know what type of content this kind of nerf is truly aimed at. I have a tendency to suspect that Blizzard does the bulk of its balancing around Raid First and Mythic Plus as more of an afterthought, and I'm not sure that this accurately lines up with the feelings of the player base. I know a lot of people who are losing interest in raiding over the years and getting more into the much less time-intensive commitment of doing Mythic Plus dungeons that can really get you pretty similar place gear-wise in the long run. So which specs will be most affected by this change? Interestingly, there were basically 0 healer balance changes included in this post about 10.1 changes, so healers are pretty much going in as is. If the nerf during beta is any indication, healers with strong, consistent throughput will suffer the least, and healers that have weaker, sustained throughput will be adversely affected. I'd say that leaves Resto Shaman and Resto Druid in a really good spot, and probably hurts a class like Disc Priest, which I remember struggling a lot following the old 40% nerf. It's also probably worth mentioning that Preservation Evoker, which has really fallen out of favor in high keys recently due to a steady stream of nerfs, could potentially benefit a lot from this change, as it's one of the few healers that has talents that heal by percentage of health. 25% more health equals 25% more healing for a rewind and the golden hour talent, so unless something changes here, Evoker stocks immediately go up with this change as well. I'm definitely in wait and see mode when it comes to this change in 10.1. If healer balance is strong, I think it will be okay and likely be offset by our scaling item levels for the most part. I just don't want to see entire specs getting dumpstered because they can't meet certain healing checks. If you're going to have healing checks be a limiting factor in dungeons, it's crucial that all the healing specs are actually able to meet the check. I think there's honestly some disagreement within the community on what a healer's role really should be in a 5-man environment. Should it be more of a battle healer where you heal occasionally and focus more on damage, or should it lean more the other way and be almost solely focused on healing? If the answer is the former, I'd like to see healer damage abilities be more impactful across the board. Today I asked my subscribers their opinion on the changes, and your reactions were quite mixed as well. At the time of this recording, 27% of you were for the changes, 27% were against, and 46% were like me and saying they'll wait and see how it pans out. Interesting range of comments too, with people saying they would literally quit because healing was so rough in Season 1, to people saying they felt like they barely needed to heal at all. Oh, and by the way, if you want to see more Mythic Plus healing content and discussion like this, you should pop that subscribe button like it's an explosive half a second from wiping your group. I'd love to hear more of you guys' thoughts and opinions on this change, so go ahead and leave those in the comment sections. As always, if you made it this far in the video, it really helps me out if you hit that like button as well. And until next time, everybody, happy healing.